Good morning. Grace, Reverend Fathers, brothers and sisters, good morning. So our talk, Kids Come Second, is not a reference to any kind of Jonathan Swift paperwork that you may have seen circulating at any period of time. A couple people laughed. Thank you very much for that reference. Your English literature professors are very happy about that. And also, just kind of a reference to what Father Pete said, is that, the two things kind of go hand in hand. And so what we're going to talk about is how at the parishes that I've been fortunate enough to serve at, working with young adults first actually helped us do the ministries everywhere else. One of the nice things about getting together like this is you're able to kind of come back from the front lines, wherever those front lines might be in the parish, and actually come back and say, hey, here's what worked where we were. We'll see if it works where you are. That said, there's also a lot of humility in this message, if not only because I owe so much to Father Aris Matrakos, to whom I'm terribly indebted for how this ministry actually worked, as well as Father Pete Sotiris, Father Mark Leondis, and others, for the fact that this was as successful as it has been, and what that word exactly means. The other thing to say is, whenever you're fighting a battle, depending on where that battlefront is, whether you're in a jungle or in a desert, it's going to require different ammunition, different camouflage, different tactics. So the things that we'll explain here, what's worked where we've been, and then wherever you might be, maybe it'll help to change or adapt or, change how you're doing things where you are, from naming things and the like. One of the things to say really quickly that I thought Father Pete said that was really important is no matter how you approach your ministry, is to remember those words that he said by Blessed Augustine, which is, tell me you love me, and you can tell me anything. Now, of course, that properly applied actually means the person has to know that you love them before you can talk to them. And so in any of these things we're about to talk about, with any of these ministries that we have, whatever you're doing when you're working with anyone from the age of 18 to 80 down to 8, is the person has to have a knowledge of the fact that they are loved. Loved by God, yes, but loved by you. So when you're spending time with them, it's important that they know they're loved. As the old adage goes, you can win the argument and lose the person. So loving the person is important. The other last thing to say out of every lengthy introduction, I am from the South, is this idea of unity is brilliant because it is all one thing. This is what the church does, right? It brings everything together. It kind of unites the cosmos and the person. The personhood, our personhood, is found in community as well. So everything we're about to say is about bringing all of this kind of into one thing. And it kind of goes like this. Actually, on the cab ride here, a youth director who's with us today was telling me that he was having some troubles getting things started at the parish, which is usually how it goes. And he said, okay, so how do we get people involved in the parish? There's this teenage boy and we're having trouble engaging him. And my first response was, well, do you know of any young adult men, maybe in their 20s or 30s? It could be kind of an older brother to him. And he went, huh. So did I. It kind of revealed how I see doing ministry in the church. And it's something that Father Mark Leondis said, and it's about working with young adults first. So what does that look like? When we got to Holy Trinity in San Francisco, we had probably a half dozen young adults who were around the parish, as is usually what you find, the prayerful type, PKs, things like that. And so the idea was using Tim Petitis' thesis of holiness. You can ask us about that later in this. People who have heard me speak before know what that's about. We decided, let's just invest in relationship and prayer. And we met twice a week. Pew Research said, rather twice a month. Pew Research said that's a good thing to do. Once a month isn't often enough. Every week can become exhausting, so twice a week is what we went with. And we got these young adults together. The group kind of grew to a number of about 63 that would be involved with this program. And from there, what we would do is we would use these persons to help us do other ministries in the church. For instance, we started a program called First Fridays. The first Friday of every month, there was this event for families. But we were able to kind of turn counselors out of these young adults and put them into this First Fridays and use them as the staff to kind of generate these programs we were running. So yes, of course, programs don't work. Relationships do. But in these activities we had going, we put these young adults into these circumstances so that it would work kind of that way with those relationships. And it grew. We tried this again when we got to Assumption in Arizona because we had the chance, to go from one laboratory to the next and see, does this really work? And we've been really, pleased to see it's happening and working again really well there. This investment in Christ and nothing else, and in building up these relationships and training young adults, like you do with your counselors, is continuing to bear fruit there. And we've seen a group of about 3 or 4 young adults grow to about 40 young adults at this one parish, and it's exciting. So how did that happen? You know, to put a bit of meat to the psychology, a lot of times you hear people say, we lost a whole generation of people. And I think the reason it kind of stings when we hear that, you know, where are the young adults? Where did they go? Is because the real question is how we might have lost them. How did we lose them? You know, if a person's hanging on a cross and a person turns away from it, that's their choice. But I think there was kind of a fear psychologically, so to speak, in the church. Did we accurately do youth ministry the way it needed to be done? And I remember sitting down in Father Ayres' office when I first got there to San Francisco, and we were talking about the fact that in the 1960s and 70s, the Protestants figured out that the bait and switch doesn't work. No child is going to rest or supine on the laurels of a basketball three-point shot when life hits them and know their faith that way. So what had to happen was, instead of focusing on Greek dance and basketball, just to keep it 100% because everybody in this room is all in these situations, we said instead let's just focus on Christ and Him crucified. We kind of erred on this kind of crazy idea that maybe Jesus Christ is enough. Go figure. I mean, imagine sitting down at a table and finally hearing not how to Greek dance and remember, like, ouzo's a funny thing when you're 17 years old, which is nonsense. Instead, we sat across from a bunch of young adults, especially, and said, the truth of the matter is this. You are the objects of the greatest romance in the history of the world. You are the objects of the great romance that is the history of the world. You are desperately loved by God and matter. So it's time for a new life, a real life, a way of living. And go figure, it was enough, you know. And so this ministry began to grow just based on that love of Christ. What's neat about that is that taking those young adults, we as Orthodox Christians have this really kind of cool thing that Protestants in some ways do better than us, to our great shame, but we could do better. And that is, a lot of Protestants will talk about this idea of discipleship, which they do really well. But it doesn't match what the Orthodox Church can do in terms of discipleship. Look at our sacraments, the confessions we can do, the services. Everything is there to construct an incredible Christian young adult. And what happens with that is that incredible Christian young adult, so informed, so formed, now takes the same lessons that we taught them and now applies it to the youth in which they're with. You know, Father Panayotis made a good point. We send these people to camp, they're trained for a week, they're told what the faith is actually about, and it's not about Greek dance and Greek festivals. And then they go and they apply that same information to the youth in which they're in contact with. And what's been beautiful about it is, if we're going to fail, let's fail there. Let's fail on the cross. If we're going to fail, I would really rather fail having said we told them they were loved and that they mattered and who Jesus Christ was. And it is kind of funny because the great thing it's going to require of us is just a sense of courage. When the winter retreat happens and the numbers aren't as high, is not to go, we need more people, whatever that means. I mean, I think anybody here has seen enough movies, they would rather have 8 Navy SEALs than a whole division of soldiers in the Army. You know, the numbers don't really matter. The people do. And so you focus on that, and it kind of grows from there. This is, I think, an extraordinary and important thing for us to do, because if a person walks into a parish, maybe their first thing to do as they go in, and we're wrapping up with this, is they might go in and go, I'm going to start with Goya. And in some parishes, you might be in a place where there's a lot of high schoolers, a lot of high school seniors. The question might be for us, why didn't we do that? And here's just the practical thing. When we saw young adults, we saw a group that, according to different, you can see the Greenberg Millennial Study, UCLA's 2006 study, or the USA Today Extensive Study. And what they found out is this group of millennials, which is a lot of people in this room actually, is they kind of put together a list and said these people are the most compassionate people we've seen in the past 25 years. Interesting how they might have found that out. They said this is the most team-oriented generation we've seen since the 1930s. And also since the 1930s, it's the most civically minded generation we've seen. So what we began to do is, instead of just saying to them, it's great, we're happy to have you at church, we empowered them. It was to say, we need your help. For instance, you work in Silicon Valley, you're 30 years old. Yes, we need a new website. You can do it for us. We need you to do it for us. And we began to kind of tell this generation that they were important and that we needed them to step into that role. I mean, it can be very difficult, I imagine, as a priest to say, young Yanis has gotten married, he's 33 years old, and now he has a baby. Why isn't he in the parish council, and where's his stewardship? We missed a whole training period of turning him into that person. So about comparing us to the Protestants, they do have discipleship, but we as Orthodox Christians, by investing in love and empowering people, are really having this impact on our parish and growing a missing generation who do ministry on their own. So high school is tough because they have as many responsibilities as young adults, but they're not as mobile. And the little kids, the reason we went there next is it was the idea of we may have already missed a group that have already got their disciplines. But if we focus on this smaller group, we can develop the discipline of being at the church more than once a week. Develop it in the idea of you go to church to pray, to love one another, to open up, to connect, to become family. And what was really neat in our time there is this generation grew in to fill in that kind of middle area. So it's extraordinary. I guess the thing that I want to say is this. The important part about young adult ministry, and I think it's something that may have been missed in some of the different tactics that maybe tried bait and switch, is that we need to be wary of the failure to fully integrate young adults into our parish and to empower them into different positions that are fitting of their maturity, spiritually and otherwise. And what begins to happen then is you have older brothers and sisters who are kind of in a big brother, big sister program, raising up the youth, impacting the youth in ways that we can't quite do. And also, not accidentally, but intentionally, you really begin to grow a family that all kind of grows up together. So Kids Come Second is obviously just a title and a headline ahead of a headline. Well done, Steve. But the idea of building church ministry beginning with young adults has been something that Father Mark Leondis first really enjoyed with the Archdiocese. It's something that we've seen success with in San Francisco and now again in Phoenix. And if things continue kind of trending in this direction, I think this might be, at least for this time period with these millennials, the best approach we have, which is investing in Christ and in holiness, not meeting them out at pubs. You know, we lost a whole generation. Where'd they go? They weren't in the church in the first place. What are you talking about? You know, meeting them at the church, in the church, by the church, for the church, unto Christ, by Christ, for Christ, unto Christ, to grow children in the same way. And so with that, thank you so much for letting me talk.